How to hold on to faith when everything falls apart. There are moments in life when everything seems to fall apart. The dreams we've carefully nurtured shatter, relationships we thought would last crumble, circumstances beyond our control turn our world upside down, leaving us feeling lost, broken, and hopeless. In those times, it can feel almost impossible to hold on to faith, but in the midst of chaos and despair, God calls us to cling to Him, even when everything else seems to be falling apart. Consider the story of Job. He was a man who had everything: wealth, health, a family, yet in a single day, everything was taken from him. His livestock, his servants, his children, each one was lost in a series of devastating events. Job was left sitting in ashes, covered in sores, with nothing but his pain and his faith. His wife urged him to curse God and die, saying, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." Job 2:9. But Job's response is powerful. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Job 2:10. Even in the face of incomprehensible loss, Job held on to his faith. Job's journey teaches us something profound. Holding on to faith doesn't mean we don't feel the weight of our suffering. It means that even in the darkest moments, we choose to trust in God's goodness, even when we don't understand His ways. Job's story echoes the message in Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. When everything falls apart, it's easy to lean on our own understanding, to let the weight of our circumstances define us. But God calls us to trust in Him, to submit our confusion, our pain, and our doubts to Him. Another powerful example of holding on to faith in the face of trials comes from the life of the Apostle Paul. Paul was no stranger to hardship. He faced imprisonments, beatings, shipwrecks, and constant opposition. Yet despite the suffering, Paul never lost sight of God's calling on his life. In 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, he writes, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed but not in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed." Paul's faith was not anchored in his circumstances. It was anchored in the hope of the gospel, in the knowledge that God's plan was greater than anything he could face. In the midst of hardship, he chose to persevere, knowing that God was with him, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Paul's attitude is a reflection of what Jesus taught his disciples in Matthew 17:20. Jesus said, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." It's not the size of our faith that matters, but the object of our faith. When everything falls apart, we don't have to have it all together. We just need faith, even as small as a mustard seed, placed in the hands of a powerful God. And that faith, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to move mountains. Yet, even with the examples of Job and Paul, we still face the reality of our struggles. When our world crumbles, it's easy to feel abandoned by God. The silence of God in our suffering can be deafening. In those moments, it's important to remember the words of Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Even when we don't feel His presence, God is near. He is not distant, nor is He indifferent to our pain. In fact, in our deepest suffering, He draws near to us in ways we cannot always perceive. In the midst of our struggles, we also need to remember that God's timing is not our timing. Often, when everything is falling apart, we want immediate resolution. We want answers, healing, and restoration now. But God's timing is perfect, and sometimes He allows us to walk through the storm so that our faith can be refined. James 1:2-4 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Trials are not pointless. They serve a purpose in God's plan, molding us into the people He wants us to become. Jesus Himself, in His moment of greatest anguish, modeled for us how to hold on to faith when everything falls apart. In the Garden of Gethsemane, before His arrest and crucifixion, Jesus prayed with great anguish, asking God to take away the cup of suffering He was about to drink. He prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Matthew 26:39. Even though Jesus knew what was coming, betrayal, torture, and death, he trusted in God's greater plan. In his suffering, he submitted his will to God's, choosing faith over fear, obedience over escape. When everything falls apart in our own lives, it's easy to question God's plan. But Jesus' example teaches us that faith is not the absence of struggle or doubt. Faith is the choice to trust God even when the road ahead is unclear, even when the pain seems too much to bear. Jesus knew that his suffering had a greater purpose, that through his death and resurrection, all of humanity could be reconciled to God. What seemed like a moment of utter defeat was, in fact, the greatest victory. When we feel like our world is crumbling, we must remember that God is still at work. Isaiah 55, verse 8-9 tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." We may not understand why we go through the pain and the heartache, but we can trust that God's ways are higher than ours. He sees the bigger picture, and he is using every circumstance, every trial, every moment of suffering for our good and for his glory. In those moments when everything falls apart, we must hold on to the truth that God is with us. Romans 8:28 assures us that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Even when we can't see it, God is at work in our lives. And though our faith may be shaken in the midst of trials, we can take comfort in knowing that he will never leave us or forsake us. So, when life feels like it's falling apart, hold on to the promises of God. Trust in his goodness, even when it's hard to see. Remember that faith doesn't require us to have all the answers. It just requires us to trust in the one who does. And when everything falls apart, we can be assured that God is still sovereign, still loving, and still faithful. He is with us in the storm, and he will bring us through it stronger and more complete in him.